Where are you going? Grace glanced in the mirror at her husband approaching from behind and shuddered. He had the look of a wolf. Her hand twitched, and the comb painfully pulled out a few blonde hairs. Michael, I wanted to go to the store, she said, swallowing convulsively. You were there this morning when I took James to the garden, Michael said, squinting his eyes. You asked me to make a salad today, and I'm out of beets. You didn't run out of beets today. You know that I often ask you to make salad, you could have bought it right away. Or are you just going out again on purpose? Huh, Grace. God, what the hell are you talking about? Grace, of course, didn't dare say it out loud. Her husband was standing so close and breathing so heavily that she was breathless. Shall I not go? She said in a low voice. Michael looked intently into his wife's eyes for half a minute, then slowly said. We'll go together. Just think about what else you forgot to buy first. Grace walked silently through the mall next to her husband, carrying a bag of groceries, and thought about how much she wanted Michael's vacation to be over as soon as possible. No, he's a good husband. He's just a real workaholic, tired of being at home with nothing to do, so his nerves are shot. But, frankly, this total control is starting to wear her down. Yes, of course, on the phone installed a tracker, and her husband at any time can track where she is. But at least in the store in the neighboring house will be quietly go out, without having to go away unnecessarily and not to report why it took so long to go, if suddenly a big queue and one cash register is working. Near the entrance to the women's clothing store stood a mannequin. The mannequin was wearing such a beautiful dress that Grace involuntarily stopped and admired it. She hardly ever wore dresses, and had nowhere else to wear them. But this was just the kind of dress that would fit her perfectly. Her favorite color was a rich emerald, and the cut was just right. She could wear it every day, but she wouldn't be ashamed to wear it to a party. I'd love to try it on, and I'm sure it's the right size. What are you doing? As Michael approached Grace, he glanced at his watch. Michael, look at this dress. It's beautiful. Can I try it on? I'll be right back. Where do you want it? With a kid in the sandbox? Mockingly sniggered husband, the holidays are not expected, and you have something to wear. Come on, let's go, you've got cooking to do. Grace looked regretfully at the dress, sighed, and was about to leave when she heard quick footsteps on her left and a surprised exclamation. Grace! Hi! The girl turned around. Next to her, smiling happily, stood Chloe, a former classmate. They had been friends once, but after high school their paths had diverged. Grace stayed in a small town, graduated from college and got married, and Chloe went to the capital. Oh, Chloe, hi. You're a sight for sore eyes. I haven't seen you in, 6 years? Almost 7. How are you doing? I'm fine. How long are you here for? You come to visit your parents? I don't know yet. Maybe for a long time. Listen, I'm distracting you, maybe? Chloe smiled, looking at Grace's companion. Do you choose a dress? Yes, I'm trying to persuade my wife to dress up, but she resists. Michael suddenly raised his voice, smiling broadly. Grace, are you going to measure the dress or not? Grace froze in surprise and looked at her husband in amazement. There was no trace of the sour expression on his face. Michael became friendly and gallant in an instant. Well, friend, as long as they give it, you have to take it. Chloe laughed. I think it's your style. Let's go to the fitting room, I'll help you. Grace did not notice how she was already standing with her husband and classmate at the cash register, and the polite saleswoman packed the dress of her dreams in a beautiful bag. The price tag was far from the most budgetary, and the girl was surprised to see Michael, who paid for the purchase, smiling amiably. Chloe winked cheerfully at her friend and said, Well, with an update you, Grace. Now such a dress should be walked out. Listen, guys, I have to run. Grace, give me your number. We should get together sometime and talk. It's been ages. Grace dictated Chloe's phone number and looked back at her husband. Michael with a charming smile said, Goodbye, to his wife's girlfriend and, taking Grace by the hand, headed for the exit. At home, trying on the dress and admiring her reflection in the mirror, she thought that she should thank her husband for such a gift. It seems that she was offended for nothing. He just stayed at home too long. He went out, took a walk, cleared his head, and now he was her dear, caring Michael again. Smiling, Grace entered the room, where her husband was sitting on the sofa, clicking the TV remote control with a bored look. The girl sat down next to him and, squinting slyly, said, "Thank you, my dear, for the gift. And you know, I would like to meet more often in stores. These meetings have such a good effect on you." Michael turned his head and stared at his wife. Grace shrank from his gaze, her smile gone in a second. "Have you got a sense of humor or something? Or have you forgotten why we went to the store? Take off your dress and get in the kitchen, you have to pick up the baby at the nursery." Grace lowered her eyes, slowly got up from the couch and went to the door. The fairy tale ended before it began. "Grace, hi," Chloe's cheerful voice came from the phone, "how are you? What are you doing?" "Hi, Chloe. I'm just doing stuff at home. How are you?" "I'm great. Hey, why don't we get together and talk?" "Yeah." "You wanted to do it tonight?" "Yeah." "What's the holdup?" "Yeah." "Come over to my place. My husband just got back from vacation, no one will interfere. And my son's at daycare, my mom's picking him up today. Come on, what could your husband interfere with? He's so sociable and funny." Grace was silent, not knowing what to say. "Okay, give me the address. I'll drop by after lunch. It's nice here. It's spacious. And the renovation is beautiful." Chloe, having put a cup of tea on the table, turned to Grace, "Do you rent it?" "No, it's Michael's apartment. He's good for you, of course." "Hey, Grace, why don't we have something stronger than tea? We could do with a little wine to celebrate. It's been ages since we've seen each other. Why don't we walk to the store?" "Oh, Chloe, I don't really feel like it. And Michael's probably not gonna be happy." "Oh, come on, don't talk about your husband. Come on, let's go. I remember how you were at the graduation." "Not really," Chloe giggled and got up. "Come on, get dressed, what's the time to waste? We're just a little bit at a time." Grace reluctantly got up from the couch. Really, what was the big deal? She met a friend once in 100 years. And besides, we'll be at home anyway, not out for a walk. Already entering the entrance, Grace took her phone out of her purse to see what time it was. The walk through the shopping center had involuntarily dragged on. At first, they couldn't decide what kind of wine they wanted, red or white, and in the end they decided to buy both, believing that it wasn't the last time they would meet and they could finish it at the next meeting. Then they stayed in the costume jewelry department. There was just a new arrival of lovely jewelry. And also, Chloe urgently needed new fall shoes and, of course, the girls tried on half of the store. Looking at the display, Grace was stunned. 16.45 and 6 missed calls from Michael. How could 20 minutes turn into 2.5 hours? Shaking hands inserted the key into the keyhole and realized that the door was unlocked, which meant that her husband was already home. Couldn't he get through and took off from work? God, how embarrassing in front of her classmate, now there will be such a scandal. Michael stood in the hallway. Grace crossed the threshold and caught a glimpse of his bloodshot eyes and a hand clenched tightly in a fist. A second later, Michael saw Chloe looming behind him and grinned. "Michael, what are you doing up so early today?" Grace asked, trying to keep the tremor out of her voice. "I didn't have much work to do," he replied, and Grace noticed again the flicker of aggression in his gaze as he glanced quickly at her fragile figure in her new dress. "And we decided to celebrate the meeting," Chloe said cheerfully. "Will you keep us company?" "I dare not refuse the beautiful ladies, especially since it's Friday night," Michael sang and went to get glasses. Grace walked into the room on woozy legs. There was no scandal, but she wasn't happy about it tonight. The hateful look in her eyes and the tightly clenched fist of her beloved husband stood before her eyes. What would have happened if she had come home alone? The evening passed merrily and ended rather late. After seeing their guest off and putting her in a cab, the couple returned home. Grace sat silently on the couch. Michael sat down next to her, crossing his arms over his chest. Well, I'm listening to you, Grace. What do I have to say? The girl raised her eyes and glanced at her husband. The kind mask was gone again, and two evil lights burning in the narrowed pupils stared back at her. Don't pretend, I can't stand it. You didn't answer your phone for an hour and a half. You let yourself buy alcohol without asking my permission. I'm waiting for an explanation. I didn't hear the calls, there's music playing loudly in the mall. And in this country you can buy alcohol without permission from the age of 18, Grace said, not believing that she had dared to answer her husband like that. When she saw Michael swinging his hand, she clenched her eyes tightly, but there was no blow. The man swore, got up and went to the bathroom to remove his pants. Grace jumped up from the couch. Some gut instinct told her that waiting for her husband to come out of the bathroom was not a good idea. Grabbing her purse and phone, Grace quickly slipped her feet into her sneakers, grabbed her windbreaker off the rack, and, trying to open the lock as quietly as possible, walked out of the apartment and shut the front door. Feeling her heart pounding in her throat, making it hard to breathe, she ran down the stairs and out of the driveway, heading toward the end of the building where there was a cab stand next to the store. Jumping into the only car standing, Grace leaned back in her seat, trying to catch her breath. It wasn't until she was standing at the door of her mom's apartment that she calmed down. Grace, you're crazy. Her mother was pouring hot tea from the teapot into large, puffy mugs while Grace sat with her head down on the edge of the kitchen corner at the table. What husband, Mama? The golden one, Grace. He earns a decent wage, he's got you all to himself, 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 he's got you all to himself. Mom, I wanted to work. I want to work. But Michael won't let me, absolutely not. It's like I'm a slave to him. Do you know what slavery is, daughter? You're a slave to him, and you don't like it. He wanted to hit me, Mom. First of all, he didn't. And secondly, think about it, maybe he was angry for a reason. You should be obedient with a husband like that. And anyway, as long as I've been with you, I've never seen him treat you badly. You're talking nonsense, I'll tell you that. Grace stared at the faint scratch on the table and froze. She had come to her mother for support, but all she got was accusations. I'm going to call Michael and tell him you're here. You go ahead and figure out how you're gonna apologize. No, Mom, don't, Grace shuddered, I'm going home now. It's almost 12 o'clock at night, how are you going to go? Why don't I call? I'll take a cab. Thanks for the tea, Mom. Give James a kiss for me. I'll pick him up on Sunday, as agreed. Grace left the driveway, walked to the neighbor's yard, and sank down on a bench. Tears were running from her eyes, and she had no idea what to do. 2 hours ago she had thought her mother would support and protect her, but things had turned out differently. Images from her childhood flashed before her eyes one after another. She remembered how her mother, while her father was still alive, had walked silently through the house, on the wall, trying not to be seen by him. Everything and always in the house was decided only by him. Mom did not dare to contradict him and in general mostly kept silent. Naturally, she almost never went out and practically all her time was taken up with the household and upbringing of her daughter. At the same time, Daddy was very reverent towards Grace. Apparently, that's why she hadn't paid much attention to the relationship between her parents, and only now, when her mother, wringing her hands, asked her to keep quiet and be patient, for the sake of the family, the puzzle was fully formed in her head. Tolerate, for how long? Like Mom, until Dad died? Wait for her husband to die? You might not even have to wait. Grace shook her head and wiped away her tears. There was no other example in front of her eyes, but she was not going to live in eternal patient silence. What was she to do now? She had no money in her purse, her husband gave her money strictly for groceries, and those on account. She couldn't even get a room in the cheapest hotel to spend the night, let alone an apartment or even a room. No work, nowhere to go. Going back? No, that was out of the question. Tears rolled from the girl's eyes again, she sobbed loudly. Can I help you? Grace turned around, frightened. A thin man with glasses approached the bench. Don't be afraid, please. I want to help you. You're crying so much, what's wrong? The passerby carefully sat down on the edge of the bench. The girl looked into his big kind eyes and, unexpectedly for herself, told this complete stranger everything. And about the handsome husband, who turned out to be a real tyrant. And about her mother, who didn't want to understand her. And about the fact that she has nowhere to go, and she has a little son.
Yeah,
That's quite a story. How did you get involved with that couch boxer, Grace? The new acquaintance looked thoughtfully into the distance and said decisively. Well, here's the thing. It's impossible to sit on the bench all night, and you'll freeze to death. Let's do it this way. I'm not inviting you to my place, so that you don't think anything bad. You'll sleep at the hotel tonight, and tomorrow we'll think about it. Catching the girl's confused look, the man reassured her. I'll pay, don't worry. Agree, now is not the time to be capricious. I think it's about to start raining. Grace was uncomfortable, but she had no strength left to argue, and she had a headache. She only asked one last question. What's your name? I'm sorry, I should have known right away, but my head was full of problems. My name is Jacob. Good night, Grace. 5 years had passed. Grace got off the bus and headed toward home. She liked to get off one stop early on her way home from work, to walk a couple of kilometers, to check her head a little after the day's work. Walking leisurely down the street, she suddenly saw a familiar face. Chloe! Hi. The girl shuddered and stopped. Hello, Grace. Grace looked at her classmate with surprise. They hadn't seen each other since. Grace knew that Chloe had married Michael 6 months after her divorce. But they never spoke again. It's only been 5 years, and she's unrecognizable. She was so cheerful, trim, bright, and now. Chloe was dressed in a baggy hoodie and jeans, pale, slouched. It's so hot, and she's wearing a long sleeve. Chloe, how are you doing? What are you doing? Working. No, I don't work. I've got a 3-year-old daughter, I'm rushing to pick her up at daycare, and I've got to make dinner. Grace, why don't we do this some other time? I gotta run. Chloe raised her hand to remove a strand of hair from her forehead. The sleeve was pulled up to the elbow, exposing the purple burgundy bruises on her wrist. Intercepting her friend's gaze, Chloe quickly lowered her sleeve and, muttering,
bye,
hurried away around the corner. Grace slowly wandered toward the house. God, I'm glad I dared to go then. She thought, and immediately felt a pang of pity. She took her phone out of her purse, found Chloe's name in the list of contacts and, hoping that she had not yet returned home to her husband, typed a message. Chloe, if you need help, just know I'll help you. After sending the text message, Grace breathed in a full breath of clean evening air and hurried home, where 3 beloved men were waiting for her, her son James, her husband Jacob and their son Nick, who was born a year after their wedding. Grace walked home and remembered what had happened over the years until she met Chloe. The night she decided to leave her tyrant husband, Jacob paid for Grace to stay in a cheap hotel room for the night. The next day they met at a coffee shop to discuss the situation. Jacob listened to Grace and advised her to file a police report against her husband to document the domestic violence. He also suggested that Grace move in with him temporarily until she could find a job and rented accommodation. Grace gratefully agreed. She moved into a private room in his apartment. Jacob turned out to be a very kind and understanding man. He talked to Grace a lot and supported her in a difficult moment. Soon Grace got a job in a small firm as a secretary. After a couple of months, she was able to rent a separate apartment. During this time between Grace and Jacob romantic feelings arose. They began dating as a couple. Jacob took care of Grace, they went out a lot, went to the movies, and rode bicycles. Grace finally felt happy. A year later they were married. They had a son together. Grace is proud that she found in Jacob a true friend and a loving husband. Now she has a happy family and a reliable rear. After Grace left, Michael's life went downhill. He lost his job, drank a lot, fell into depression. Chloe, having married him, was very soon disappointed. Michael turned out to be a violent and irascible man. He regularly beat Chloe, controlled her every move. Chloe was forced to endure this hell for the sake of her daughter. She had no means of leaving her husband. She lived like in prison, abandoned her friends, stopped looking after herself. When Grace met Chloe on the street, she looked like a pale shadow of her former self. But the support of her friend gave her strength. Soon after this meeting, Chloe decided to go to the police and write a statement on Michael. She was helped to formalize the divorce and receive compensation for moral damages. Chloe started a new life together with her daughter. She got a job, began to smile and enjoy every day. Grace and Chloe renewed their friendship. And Michael remained a lonely loser with compromised health because of his addictions. After all their experiences, Grace and Chloe came to an important conclusion. They realized that no one has the right to infringe on the rights and freedom of women, to humiliate her human dignity. Unfortunately, society still believes that a woman must obey her husband unconditionally. But this is wrong. Every woman deserves respect, has the right to dispose of her life, build a career, socialize with friends. She doesn't need to live in an atmosphere of fear and violence. Grace and Chloe have decided that they will no longer allow